करणीयमथ कुशलेन यन्तं सतं पदम् अभिसमेच सको उजु च सुजु च सुवचो च समुद्वनतिमानि सन्तु सको च सुभरो च अपकिचो च सल्लौकौति सन्तीन्द्रियो च निपको च अपगभो कुलेषु अनुनुगीथो न चङ्खुदं समाचरे किञ्चि येन वियुं परे उपवदेयु सुखिनो वा खेमिनो होन्तु सबे सत्ता भवन्तु सुखी तथा ये केचित् सर्वभूतेषु दशावाथावरा वा अनवशेषा दीघा वा ये महन्ता वा मच्चिमा रसकाणुकथुल्ला दीठा वा ये वा अदीठा ये च दूरे वसन्ति अविदूरे भूता वा सम्भवेशी वा सबे सत्ता भवन्तु सुखी तथा न परो परं निकुपेथ नातिमय्येथ कथचिन किञ्चित् व्यारोसना पटिगसंज्ञा नायमय्य स दुःखमिच्छेय माता यथा नियं पूतं आयुषा ये कपूतमनुरखे एवं पिसबभूतेषु मानसं भावये अपरिमाणं मेतं च सबलोकस्मिन् मानसं भावये अपरिमाणम् ऊर्ध्वं अधो च तिर्यं च असंबाधं अवेरं असपतं पीठं चरं निशीनो वा शयानो वा यावतस्य विगतमिधो एतं सतिं अदिठेय ब्रह्ममेतं विहारं इदमाहु दीठं च अनुपगमा सिलवादर्शनेन सम्पन्नो कामेषु विनयकेदं न हि जातु गभसेयं पुनरतीति. Adding to the chant, I would like to say that we all have our six senses that monitors or give us direction to really understand what the best means is. But it is important that we should really understand what is good for self and for others, and what is bad for self and for others. Thank you, JB. I call Sujit, please take over the platform.
Thank you, Lakhinder, for this beautiful chant and the explanations which you give. Thank you for leaders. Now I will request Venerable Professor Bodhi to please start his Dhamma dialogue. Please.
Can you hear me, Sujit? So,
yes,
it's a very important day for all of us as Buddhists and as followers of Baba Sahib. So, as we discussed, I just plan to share some insights, especially in a very important domain of the Buddhist framework and also in terms of Buddhist practice, which relates to the characteristics of the Dhamma. So what I have done today basically is to kind of, in a short 15-20 minutes of just reflections, just to discuss a little bit about what constitutes this idea of Dhamma, how do we understand it, and why is it so important for us in this day and age to kind of revisit some of these very important, not only life, but social processes and even physical processes in that sense. We are in the midst of a very difficult situation, not only we, but our country and also all human beings in the universe. The world itself is in a little bit of a crisis that probably one has not felt in hundreds of years. Although we meet today as a group, although we meet today as a Sangha, although we meet today as Buddhists, most of us have also experienced a lot of pain, a lot of grief. We've had our friends who have passed away. We've had near and dear ones who have passed away. And there's a lot of heaviness that most of us are experiencing in our own personal lives, in the lives of the community, and probably the lives of the country, the lives of the world. So while it is a very important day for us to meet, to collectivize, to sit together, it is also a very important day for us to remember about our responsibilities as human beings, probably, and how and what possibilities are available for us to live in this world. I mean, as we all know, and many of us who have followed both Buddhism and the writings of Baba Sahib, there are many reasons why Baba Sahib himself, as an individual, after intense engagement with his social and political context, he chose Buddhism and saw in the teachings of the Buddha, more specifically in the teachings of Shakyamuni, he saw in the teachings of Shakyamuni nothing but freedom, freedom of mind, social emancipation. And in these kind of ideas of emancipation and freedom, when he looked at his own reality and the realities that he was experiencing, he found that the teachings of Shakyamuni were so much not only related, but so much part and parcel of the need to kind of get away from things like supernatural beliefs, to get away from superstitious beliefs, to get away from this concept of God, do away with this concept of soul, sacrifices, speculations, the infallibility of, claims of God having revealed and spoken through books. And also this whole idea of, in the teachings of Shakyamuni himself, an openness to multiple interpretations of his teaching, depending on context, on history, and on social realities that people live in. So in the teachings of Shakyamuni, Baba Sahib saw many of the things which he considered fundamental in the struggle for a social emancipation and the struggle for freedom of mind. And I think these are the reasons that attracted him so much to the teachings of Shakyamuni. And not only that, he also saw in the teachings of Shakyamuni that in due course of time became a framework, a religious framework, in the way he put it, that the teachings of this particular individual human being was compatible with science. Buddhism can stand the tests of science. And as many Buddhists would opine, if there are any teachings or any beliefs that cannot stand the test of science, we should let go of those teachings. So not only that Buddhism takes you away from superstition, from the soul, from God, from supernatural beliefs, but it's also scientific. It can stand the test of science. And for Baba Sahib, such a religion which can stand the test of science, based on reason and experiences of people, was very fundamental to his project of emancipation. Baba Sahib would constantly write that his followers, the followers of Shakyamuni himself, were told not to accept his teaching just because it came from him, but after their own faculties of reason and experience agreed with these processes in the context and in the historical moment that they lived in, then only they shall follow for the good and the welfare of everybody else. So one thing that is very important on a day like today is to revisit why Baba Sahib walked the path and asked many of us to walk the path of Buddhism. There are many other components which are fundamental and critical to these processes. But to me, at least at this day, on this particular day, these two things are very important. A movement away from superstition and God and soul and sacrifice and illegitimacy of texts and superstitious and supernatural ideas, anchored strongly in science and reason and experience, self-respecting in terms of even disagreeing with certain interpretations of the text that is available within the Buddhist framework, until and unless it agrees with the welfare of all, with reason, with rationality, with self-belief, with dignity. So these two components are very important in order to remind ourselves as we revisit on this particular day when we come together as a Sangha. Now, it is also important to recollect that in Baba Sahib, when he was looking at Buddhism, one of the key things that also attracted, other than many things that attracted him in Buddhism, was also the idea of the Dhamma. Because Baba Sahib saw the Dhamma in very unique ways. For some of us who have read the writings of people about the Dhamma from various other individuals and practitioners and contexts across the world, the way Baba Sahib conceived the Dhamma was very, very important. Although we don't have time to go into the details of this, it is important at least to mention that he saw the Dhamma and an engagement with understanding the Dhamma as a process of the cleansing of the impurities of mind. For him, this cleansing of impurities of mind was very important. And anybody who has gone into details into his writing, he used to always stress on a wholesome view of the world, a proper view of the world, a view of the world in which there is collectivization, there is welfare, there is the good of all. And to carry these views. And when a particular view has been destroyed by stratification, destroyed by inequality, destroyed by hatred. He saw in the Dhamma this one single space that actually will cleanse these impurities in order to have a wholesome view of reality. Not only that, he saw in the engagement with this idea called the Dhamma as the possibilities of the promotion of understanding rather than superstitious belief. For him, to understand something was fundamental. To know something was important. Just mere traditions being brought from one group to another group, from one generation to another generation, was for him a problematic proposition. Stressing on the understanding, he believes that Dhamma is one thing that allows this understanding and values understanding of people's life. Not only does it stress on understanding, but this understanding promotes what he calls friendship. And in the promotion of friendship, it brings into question something fundamental, such as morality. He says Shila is very, very important. To be a moral human being and to attempt to be a moral human being in difficult situations, within this society that we live in, within this fraternity that we live in, within this sorority we live in. This one principle of morality was fundamental to this way of living in our life. And it is this morality, he says, in which something called compassion can arise. The compassion we must have for each other, the ways we begin to each other, the way we perceive each other, the way we engage with each other. It is this kind of a compassion that the real society can arise. A real beautiful society arises when morality and compassion becomes a fundamental basis for the construction of a society. And he saw in this teachings of the Buddha and in this idea of the Dhamma as the basis for the construction of a new social reality. One thing that always struck Baba in the way he conceived each of these processes, each of these teachings, was that no matter what these teachings say, there's something very, very, very critical in the message of the Buddha, and that is that all his teaching was always to break social barriers. We are aware as part of a society that there are so many boundaries, whether it's social, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, whether it's economic boundaries. Stratification takes place in society. But the vision has always been in order to break these barriers. Not to unite people and make them one, but to recognize that there are multiple realities that exist and that each of these have a larger, compassionate, moral fraternity in which they must live in this world. He also saw in the Dhamma something very fundamental, and this is so critical to us, that it is worth and not birth that should define who we are as dignified, self-respecting human beings. And this message strikes at the very core of people who are Buddhists in India. If there's one thing that defines a Buddhist personality, a Buddhist belief system, is that we believe that in this one single birth is the possibilities of growth, the possibilities of growing, the possibilities of becoming. It is not my birth that defines me. Either will allow me to propel me to another level, another stage, or that will restrict me from achieving anything in this world. But birth is secondary to this idea of worth. How can we make ourselves as beings achieve and attain many things in this world within the framework we have set in this one single life? And all of these ideas, the way he saw in terms of the Dhamma, for him, equality is the governing principle. Whether there will be equality or not in this world is secondary to him. But the informing principle of how we should live our life, how we should perceive this world, how should we engage with each other, how should we live with each other, that informing, guiding principle is always equality. So when we revisit why Baba Sahib gave us this path, not only gave, but resurrected this path that always existed in this part of the world. And why did he say this is the path that we have to follow? There is something very beautiful in all of these processes that we see. In Buddhism, we always say that anybody who takes refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the very act of taking refuge, have already made you a Buddhist. There doesn't need to be, it is important to be part of a ceremony, it's important to be part of so many other processes because you will belong to a particular culture, a particular structure, a particular system of belief, or systems of cultural practice. But what is very important is that for many of us, the minute you have taken refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, you have already opened up a world, the world of Buddhism, a framework, a frame of reference of how you begin to see and experience this world. Now, each of these concepts, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, have very, very different meanings. The only important thing that I want to say at this point in time is not to isolate them because they are all one. The Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha is one. So in this next 10 minutes or so, I just want to reflect about what some of these words mean, especially Dhamma, and also a little bit about the Sangha. If you look at the many suttas that are written about some of the key aspects of Buddhism concerning the characteristics of this Dhamma, there's a lot of discussion about four very important concepts. One concept is called metta, another concept is called karuna, mudita, and upekha. Generally translated as upekha means equanimity, mudita means rapture and joy and discernment. Karuna is sometimes translated as compassion, and metta as friendship, as loving kindness. So they've been, but the beauty, as I said, is in Buddhism we should never caught to definitions, never get caught to definitions, because these are processes. How a person at the age of 10 years old will understand metta will be very different than how a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, or how someone with very deep experiences in life understand the word metta will be very different with someone who has not so much of deep experience. And how someone who's faced a crisis in life will understand karuna is very different from someone who has not experienced, a crisis that is, that would basically change the way you see the world and so on and so forth. So even though I mentioned these words in front of you, these words are not to be seen as definitive. They're to be seen as processual, depending on people's reason and experience in this world. Now, there are a lot of debates about these categories, but many of these categories, both upekha, mudita, karuna, and metta, in the suttas that is available, which Ananda kind of spoke of and shared with the world of what he learned from Shakyamuni, one thing became very clear, that these four states of being arose from Shakyamuni's experiences of what is generally called the jhanas. And what is the jhanas? In short, meditation. So Shakyamuni gave 8 stages of how people, when they get into deep meditative states, I would prefer using the word cultivation rather than meditation, but for the sake of just a discussion in the Sangha today, if you get deep in what is actually called meditation, there's another word for meditation called sati, or samma sati, and we generally refer to these processes as samadhi, effort, concentration, and mindfulness. So when you get into deep states of samadhi, you begin to experience layers and layers and layers of reality. Now, anybody who has engaged will know this. The ideas of the Buddha are a discovery. These are things that has to be discovered. They are not belief system for you to believe. All of the teachings of the Buddhas are discoveries. Like science, everything is a discovery. Every law is a discovery. It is not a theoretical position put in the domain of belief systems. So when the Buddha speaks some of these processes, it has come from deep discovery. And many people who have engaged in samadhi also know that they can discover the same laws that the Buddha discovered. So from these jhanas, he called, and he just in short to give you a sense about, I know many of you know this, but just today to reflect upon, when you begin to engage in what is called, applied thought, sustained thought, certain sense of rapture that you experience, discernment, mindfulness, and fourth level, which is generally called one-minded concentration. These are the first four jhanas that Shakyamuni spoke about. That when you get into these processes of samadhi, these are the first few experiences that you will begin to have. Following which, there will be another four types of experiences. One is called boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Now, I don't need to say this to a Buddhist Sangha because every one of us know this, but these are what is generally called the jhanas. And it's from these jhanas that the Buddha began to explain what human beings can experience. What are the possibilities of experience that is opened up when you begin to experience these states of jhanas? The first generally that he speaks about is that when you're open to what is understood called metta, the minute you experience metta and you cultivate metta and you cultivate this beautiful loving kindness, and the minute you engage in that, there is an awareness that is released through the practice of metta. And he called that the beautiful liberation. It is in the practice of metta that you begin to experience the reality as it is, a liberated mind. Now, what is important to understand when I refer to these characteristics of the Dhamma, in terms of metta, karuna, mudita, and upekha, is that in these states you begin to experience the Dhamma. Not only do you begin to understand the Dhamma, but you begin to experience it. There's a difference between experiencing the Dhamma and understanding the Dhamma. In Buddhism, there are two frameworks. The Patiksha Samupad helps you to understand and see the Dhamma. But these characteristics of the Dhamma helps you experience the Dhamma itself. I used to call this the Dhamma Viharas. And by Dhamma Viharas, I basically means the experience of the Dhamma itself. Now, the point to be made, at least in today's gathering, is to mention that when you are cultivating metta, cultivating loving kindness, when you are cultivating this kind of a process, you release, the Buddha says, you release this awareness about the cultivation of metta releases what is called beauty. Uses the word beauty, and the beautiful life, and the beautiful liberation, the freedom that you will begin to experience. However, you cannot do that unless you engage in the jhanas. And by jhanas here are the few things that I have already spoken to you about. But in the jhanas, you experience what is called the analysis of the qualities. You begin to, when you cultivate metta, you begin to understand reality, the qualities of reality, the qualities of your body, the qualities of your mind, the qualities of your senses, the qualities of your thought. So the cultivation of metta is not merely a meditative practice, but it's also a path in which you begin to have clarity and analytical ability to see your body, to see your thoughts, to see your sensations, and so on and so forth. And in on doing that, he gives a beautiful one, that we must persist, constantly persist when we are practicing this loving cultivation, kind of a loving kindness cultivation. The experiences of rapture, the experience of calm, the experience of concentration, the experience of equanimity, these are all part and parcel of what we call the cultivation of this loving kindness. So why do I want to say this here? It's not because of anything else, but I want to say that loving kindness as a cultivation in our life, to experience the Dhamma as it is a big effort that we must put. It doesn't come naturally to human beings. There must be persistence, there must be calm, there must be concentration, there must be equanimity, there must be the analysis of various factors. This is what exactly is called understanding. When we use the word understanding in Buddhism, we are referring to all of these processes. So the first thing that is actually very important to kind of comprehend is this idea called metta. And the need for us to cultivate this through effort, through persistence, through clarity, through analysis, through calmness of mind, through equanimity, and so on and so forth. The Buddha says, as I said, those who cultivate metta experiences the beautiful liberation. Those, on the other hand, who have reached a particular stage where they cultivate karuna or compassion, using the same methods and the techniques that the Buddha has given the jhanas, they begin to experience what is generally called the infinite space. So when you are doing karuna bhavna, when you are cultivating compassion in your own life, in your own body, you begin to experience what is generally called the infinite space. There are some who cultivate mudita or rapture. They begin to experience what is called infinite consciousness. And there are people who cultivate upekha, translated in a very, very deep manner, called equanimity. They begin to experience what the Buddha calls nothingness. Now, these are generally things that the Buddha himself, or Shakyamuni himself, was stated to have stated to Ananda, who then wrote these processes. And then in due course of time, it has come to us from the Pali Canon. But what is important for us as the followers of Baba Sahib is to realize that these are what we call the characteristics of the Dhamma. The Dhamma in which Baba Sahib saw so much of the possibilities of the freedom of mind and social emancipation. The characteristics of this Dhamma is that this Dhamma is always loving. The Dhamma cannot but be loving. The Dhamma cannot be hateful. And it is in this kind of an understanding that the Dhamma is all loving, always freedom, always beautiful liberation, the way the Shakyamuni himself said. It's what attracted Baba Sahib to a great extent. The Dhamma is always compassionate. The Dhamma is not something that will identify and say, you are the richer one, you will get more, you are the poorer one, you will get more, you are the weaker one, you will get less, you are the stronger one, you will get more. That's exactly how things are pan out to be. The Dhamma is compassionate for everybody. It doesn't choose sides with anyone. And that is where Baba Sahib beautifully locates. It is your worth and not your birth. Because the Dhamma does not side with anybody. The Dhamma is compassionate to everybody. This joy that we experience, what is generally called mudita, which is the characteristic of the Dhamma. People who experience it will say that the minute you begin to experience the Dhamma, there's a joy that arises in your own body. There's a feeling that you begin to have that makes you feel so nice about yourself, so nice about the world, so nice about many other processes that you are in, at least in this life that we live in. And you begin to experience a different kind of consciousness. And all that consciousness, not of a kind in which we cannot discover, all of us can experience it. But you begin to have and experience a total reality in which you become aware and awaken, not only to yourself, but to the realities of the world, and the realities of everybody that constitutes probably in this world that we live in. And the fourth characteristics of the Dhamma is generally this word upekha, equanimity. This capacity to be observer of your own mind that is caught in the process of the doing and the not doing, of the good and the bad, of the right and the wrong, of the tall and the short, of a world that is lived, as we generally say, at least in economics, the world that is generally lived in a binary realm, a realm in which there is always two opposites that constitute a single whole. So these characteristics of the Dhamma, upekha and the cultivation of upekha, mudita and the cultivation of mudita, karuna and the cultivation of karuna, metta and the cultivation of karuna, these are what we generally would understand as being in tune and aligning ourselves to the Dhamma, to the universal law that governs and permeates all across the universe and even the multiverse. So on this day, when we reflect about these processes, it becomes very important to kind of look how Baba Sahib arrived at these processes. many of us who have begun to read and think and discuss a little bit more details, we're starting to realize how these processes came to be, how Baba Sahib saw in this teachings of Shakyamuni our liberation, our emancipation, our healing, our freedom, our dignity, our respect, and not only that, but a dignity of respect that is dignified to the others and self-respecting to the others, that values the other. And in these kind of, ways of thinking, we now, as a Buddhist community in this country, we kind of subsumed ourselves, thinking, reflecting, practicing, sharing, cultivating, and so on and so forth. Meeting today also is very important to reflect about one more concept, which is generally called a Sangha. We are already a Sangha. In Buddhism, when we refer to the word Sangha, there is a tendency to refer to the bhikkhus and the bhikkhuni Sangha, of those who have actually taken a commitment and a vow to follow and to pursue the truth and to discover the same truths that Shakyamuni experienced in this one single lifetime. So what is very important to kind of understand is also to understand a little bit more about this word called Sangha, and not to restrict oneself in ways of understanding, So few points just to state, and we don't have too much time anymore. We are nearly reaching time to end now, 6 o'clock. When we are referring to the word Sangha in Buddhism, again, never to get caught with the definition of a word, but to see it in process. I used to always tell myself, and at least in our Sangha we discuss quite often, that when we refer to Sangha in the Buddhist framework, we are not merely referring to the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha. That would be too small a conception of Sangha. If that was the case, that the Sangha will refer only to those who have taken a vow and a commitment to pursue the truth, then what would happen to everybody else? Are we not part of that Sangha? So when the Buddha and Shakyamuni was referring to the Sangha, he was referring to both the Bhikkhu, Bhikkhuni and the laity who follow the path of the Buddha. So the Sangha is constituted of the larger Buddhist community. It is not simply meaning Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha. And this is important to understand, because when you begin to look at the Sangha as the total Buddhist community as a whole, then the clarity begins to arise. But then again, you should ask the question, did the teachings of Shakyamuni was only meant for his followers? Only those who follow Shakyamuni, and that's all that this teaching actually relates to? Isn't this teaching meant for everybody? Is it meant only for the people who follow? And anybody who thinks on that line, and the typical rational, processual, contextual, experiential way of thinking, it is clear that the message of Shakyamuni was not only meant for people who follow Shakyamuni. It was meant for all of humanity, humans itself. His message was for humanity, not only for the followers of Shakyamuni and his teachings. And I think this is important, that when we refer to this way of looking, the Sangha refers to all of humanity, not simply to people who follow Shakyamuni. And even as Buddhists, we must expand this understanding that the teachings of the Buddha is for everybody. It's not only for us who are Buddhists, or not only for the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha. There are Vinaya rules for that. But the suttas refers to everybody. Insights about the world, insights about the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, and so on and so forth. So this is the way we need to think about the Sangha. To refer to it as all, when you say the word Sangha, you're referring to all of humanity, all human beings. But again, when you think in that particular manner, and the typical Buddhist logical way of thinking, we cannot even reduce Sangha only to humans. Shakyamuni did not teach us that humans are superior to the animal world. Shakyamuni says the human beings are equal even to the animal world. There is no hierarchy between the humans and the animal. Evolution is a different matter. But this evolutionary process doesn't mean that you become hierarchical and you then impose your own perspective on the other, or your own conception of the other. And that is why he was very keen to talk about what we generally call the sentient beings. When Shakyamuni refers to the Sangha, he is not referring only to humans, he was referring to all sentient beings. How do you engage with sentient beings? How do you engage with animals? How do you engage with, everyone that we have in this world that we experience, especially who are sentient, people who can, beings who can feel emotion, beings with sensation. So these processes are very important. That's why you will always hear in the Buddhist way of thinking, sentient beings, sentient beings, sentient beings. Your metta, your karuna, your mudita, your upekha is not about you. It's about the cultivation of rooting yourself in a larger way of looking at the world in which all of sentient beings are part and parcel. When a Buddhist says, I love an animal, I love a dog, I love a cat, I respect an ant, I respect a bird, what is that part of? That is nothing but a cultivation of the Dhamma Viharas in terms of your relationship in the domain of the sentient beings. So when we refer to the word Sangha, we are referring to the totality of all sentience. This is exactly the message of the Buddha in that sense. But as you can see, that also is, if the Buddha was a teacher that came into this world and only told us to cultivate metta, karuna, mudita, and upekha to sentient beings, then is it possible for the sentient beings to be alive without the non-sentient world? What about the trees? What about the plants? What about the rocks? What about the rivers? What about water? What about oxygen? What about air? What all of these are that are fundamental for life itself, for the sentient being itself to take place. So it is very important for us to kind of understand this one particular element, that the sentient being cannot exist without the non-sentient world. And in the light of this, you will begin to see the true message of the Buddha. That when the Buddha refers to the Sangha, that if Buddha is referring to loving kindness, to compassion, to joy, to equanimity, with the totality of both the sentient and the non-sentient. Now, these messages are fundamental now, because at no point, at least in the history in the past 800, 900 years or so, have human beings begin to realize the need to connect with both the sentient and the non-sentient world. It is massive manipulation, massive exploitation, massive discrimination that has led the world into a chaos that we see. Look at the kind of things that are happening in the world right now. The kind of disease that we're experiencing, the kind of pandemic that we're experiencing in our life. We have lost the balance. The Buddha gave a beautiful smile saying that if you look at the bullock cart, if one particular wheel goes slow, the other is bound to be impacted. There will be an imbalance in the movement of the bullock cart. All of these must go hand in hand. This is to just bring to that one single point, that when the Buddha was talking about the Sangha, in the lights of what I call the Dhamma Viharas, in the light of metta, karuna, mudita, and upekha, in the light of loving kindness as a being and a cultivation of it, in the light of compassion and a cultivation of compassion, in the light of rapture, discernment, and joy and happiness, and the cultivation of sight in you and in others, in the cultivation of equanimity, the ability to discern, to see, the ability to be engaged, but from a disengaged location. In the ability of all of these processes, we must see ourselves in terms of the Sangha that is connected, both of the sentient and the non-sentient world. In many of the writings of Shakyamuni, you will see that actually the word Sangha, if you go deep and deep and deep and not get caught to parochial boundaries that are created by society. Only the Bhikkhu and the Bhikkhunis is a Sangha. We are not a Sangha. No, only the Buddhists are a Sangha. The others are not Sangha. People from other religion are not part of our Sangha. Or only human beings are part of Sangha. Animals are not part of Sangha because human beings are superior to animals. Or only the sentient are Sangha and the non-sentient is not part. The Buddha did not speak that language. The Buddha spoke the language of the totality of matter, form, and substance. All of us have to experience it. And how do we engage from metta, karuna, mudita, and upekha is in this world in which we experience matter, form, and substance is what we refer to as the Sangha. Buddhism is a process philosophy. As you grow and deepen, you accommodate multiple and multiple and multiple realities. You become a bigger human being. What is the use of a religion that makes you small, that makes you narrow, that makes you think and believe only for your own, that makes you selfish, that makes you believe that I am superior and the others are inferior? What kind of a religion is that? The message of Shakyamuni is clear. The deeper you go into the Dhamma Viharas, the wider and more accommodative personality you will have. The more you will feel for others who might not be like you. The more you will accommodate other cultures who might not be like you. The more you will have metta and karuna for animals and for plants and for trees and for oxygen, for water and for everything that exists in matter, form and substance. This is the message of the Buddha on this particular day. If we have to remember, if there is anything that pulls us back to become selfish, small, narrow, hatred, unequal, that is not the message of the Buddha. We are going the wrong path. Message of the Buddha is we must keep growing. And as we taste the Dhamma, as we taste loving kindness, this is loving kindness is not only for Buddhists, it's for all of matter, form and substance. As we have compassion, this compassion is infinite space. Buddha is infinite consciousness, a consciousness that transcends what Baba Sahib calls social boundaries and physical boundaries and political boundaries and economic boundaries. This is the message of every Buddhist. This is exactly how we must carry the message that today, on this particular very important day that we meet once a year, if there is anything that defines Buddhism, this is what should define Buddhism. It should make us grow. It should liberate us. It should emancipate us. It should make us humane. And we have this, as Baba Sahib says and as Shakyamuni says, we have this in the worth, in the belief that each of us are worth, and we have the potential and the capability to arrive and reach at these processes. Our birth is not the reason why we should not achieve it. If there's something beautiful about what Shakyamuni says is no. Everybody has the potential. It doesn't matter who you come from, whatever gender you come from, does not matter. You can achieve metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. So with these few words, I think we have already touched 6 o'clock. And it's important for us every year to meet like this. These are what you generally call gatherings, not only to clarify about Buddhism, but to meet as a Sangha, to meet as a community, and a big Sangha, not a small Sangha. In this Sangha, everything is involved. The air, the oxygen is involved. Your computer is involved. Your eyes are involved. Your body is involved. Your friends are involved. Your families. People who have come, people who have gone. Everybody is involved. We've had many friends of ours who have passed away during COVID. All of them are involved in these processes. And it should only deepen the Dhamma Viharas as we experience the Dhamma. So with these few words, I will pass on to Sujit, who will carry on with the gathering, and probably we can end with the Mahamuni Mantra for today.
Thank you very much, sir, for this interesting Dhamma dialogue. Actually, when the worlds are confused with the Brahma Vihara and Dhamma Vihara, you actually clearly stated that how the Metta, Karuna, Upekkha and Mudita are not part of Brahma Vihara but the Dhamma Vihara. And the second concept where the people are restricted themselves with the Sangha as a Bhikkhu Sangha, and there is a long distance create in the laity or lay person and the Bhikkhu Sangha. You beautifully explained that Sangha is not restricted with with human being, but it goes beyond it. So I just said sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well said, beautifully said, equanimously said. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We will do Mahamuni Manto. I will request all of you, wherever you are, just sit comfortably, close your eyes. We'll do Mahamuni Manto 10 times in this occasion. If possible, just listen with your body. Calmly, gently sit down and listen the words with your whole body. Just gently close your eyes We'll do Mahamuni Manto. Muni, Muni, Mahamuni, Shakya Muni, Sadhu, 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 Muni, Muni, Mahamuni, Shakya Muni, Sadhu. Thank you everyone. Thank you. And yes,
So happy Buddha Purnima to everybody. And
happy
it's
Buddha
important.
Purnima to everybody.
Yeah,
I think all of you are muted.
It's okay. Okay then. Shall we call it a day?